you have a practice or are you running a business? Valuation is the ultimate KPI.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast, brought to you by Trulytics, the wealth management industry's only comprehensive advisor transition management platform designed to empower individual advisors and the broker-dealers and RIAs that serve them to seamlessly navigate the entire advisor career lifecycle. My name is Mike Langford, and I'm the host of the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast. And this week on the show, I'm joined by Brad and Brennan Bergdahl of Premier Wealth Management Group to discuss how implementing a succession plan has transformed their business. Now, this is a father and son duo, and you're going to hear some really interesting stories about the origin story of the business and how Brad grew it over the years and had to make some really important kind of business survival decisions, frankly, along the way to get Premier Wealth to where it is today. And then what happened when his son, Brennan, joined the team and started growing the business. And the two of them had to look each other in the eye and make some decisions about the future of the business, about making sure that the business continued to thrive and serve its clients appropriately. And what would that mean for Brennan and for, frankly, growing the business and adding other advisors in the future? So it's really, really interesting. I love the conversation the three of us had. Very thoughtful gentlemen, really smart guys about growing the business as well. And, one of the things you'll hear in this episode that I think is important to take away and really think about when you're considering succession planning for your business is that many of us, and I think myself included, when you think about succession planning for your business and transitioning out of the business someday, it kind of feels like you're planning for an eventual funeral, right? That hey, I'm going to be exiting the business at the end of my career, kind of that mindset. But Brad and his son Brennan discovered that the process allowed them to focus on what's really important to the business, both currently and for its long-term growth prospects, that making sure they had everything in place was really going to allow the business to thrive now and continue to be viable and grow many, many years in the future. So really exciting stuff. I don't want to ruin the surprise. You're going to really enjoy it. As always, make sure you do send in your questions and thoughts for guests to appear on the show. Send that into mike@trulytics.com or podcast@trulytics.com. Make sure it gets to me and we go through that. Love to hear those suggestions. You can also swing by the website, trulytics.com, or on socials. We're Trulytics everywhere on social, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. So love to hear from you in those places. And lastly, of course, please do like and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcast jam on, because we want to make sure other people can discover the show as well. Okay? Well, without any further yammering from me, why don't you go ahead and grab a beverage, sit down, pop your earbuds in, and let's get it on. Here's Brad and Brennan.
Brad and Brennan, I am so excited to have you on the show. I really do appreciate you making the time. So thanks. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. So I thought we'd kick off because it's such an interesting story. We had spent some time during the prep call talking about your journey to Premier Wealth Management. And Brad, I wonder if you kind of give us that overview, because I think it's one of those things where every advisor has a different journey, but over time there will be some common challenges. An individual advisor will find him or herself in, and then as it grows into a team, that team will have some challenges. And it sounds like you had some, based on what you shared with me in the prep call, some really interesting challenges along the way and turning points along the way, which made you rethink the business and so forth. So I thought maybe you might want to be willing to share those.
I guess, our conversation before, I was just mentioning that out of college, I had ended up in working in the oil industry in Western North Dakota for 4 years and just decided that wasn't the career path that I wanted to take. And I had been working with a local advisor and investing my money at that time. And he had suggested I maybe consider getting in the business. Well, I didn't really want to stay out and living in the oil patch, and ended up moving out to Santa Maria, California, and started with IDS American Express back in '85. And that was right when they were ramping up the West Coast Space Shuttle program. So I had kind of built my client base on working with space shuttle people. And about a year and a half into that, that's when Challenger ended up blowing up. And within 6 months, they had mothballed and scrapped the whole space shuttle program on the West Coast. And in the interim, I had been in discussions with some people back in my hometown where they were, First Bank System was divesting all of their small town and rural banks and selling them to local investors. And they had approached me to come back and run their insurance agency. And I guess after a lot of pondering, I just decided, well, I'll come back if we can start an investment program. And that was really, in the advent of starting banks getting involved with investments. And so I came back and started that, and I had looked at an opportunity there to be able to provide investment services to multiple banks. But during the 6-year period, I'd say from 87 to basically 93, we couldn't get approval from the state banking commissioner. And I live in a town of 2,500 people, so very rural, and really saw that we needed to regionalize in order to try and be successful with this business. Could not get the approval, and ended up taking a job with a large bank in Iowa. During that period of time, I was only there 2 months, and different banks got together and said, well, will you come back and run a program for us if we can get approval from the state banking commissioner, and you'll own a quarter of the business. Well, I ended up coming back and doing that. They got approval from the state banking commissioner. So we had ran, Premier was formed in 1993, and basically had 6 other advisors, I'd say within a 150-mile radius in different banks. And a lot of the advisors that I had were second career guys. They had either owned businesses and sold them, or had come from wirehouses. But the program just really never took off. A lot of these guys weren't real motivated. They were independent contractors for us. And the big issue was trying to come up with a buy-sell. I had a board of directors that was comprised of the bank presidents of the 3 banks and a director from each of those banks. And trying to come up with some kind of a buy-sell agreement, I think we probably worked on it for 15 years and just really could not move it off center. Basically, wow. They were saying that, well, the business isn't really worth anything if you're not here. And it kind of came down to, well, who owns the clients? Does Premier own the clients, or does the bank own the clients? And it just was going nowhere. I had a number. I was down to one other advisor because the others had all retired, and had approached the group because I had been in discussions with my prior broker dealer, which was LPL, how I move forward with this. And they just kept telling me, you need to unwind it. Your ownership structure is too complicated. Because I owned a quarter, and each of the respective banks each owned a quarter. Plus, with those banks earning a quarter, there was each one of those entities probably had 20 people involved with each of the respective banks. So it was very, very diluted. And I approached our board of directors and just basically said, this is what I'm being told by the broker dealer. The ownership structure is too complicated. I'm going to have a lot of difficulties trying to recruit anybody or even another advisor that may have an existing book to get involved because it's too complicated. And they agreed to sell their portions to me, and that was back in 2015. So we had 22 years of kind of walking through the mud and trying to gain traction. During that period of time, Brennan, my son, had been going to school for majoring in investments, but I don't think he ever had, and I'll let him speak for himself, visions of working with me. But after we kind of got the ownership issue resolved, he agreed to join. And then the one remaining advisor transitioned out. And since then, we in 2018, we joined Carson Partners and got introduced to Carla McCabe with Truelytics, and trying to really come up with, what is the business valued at? How do we work on succession planning? Because in all honesty, and I'm 62 years old, and I'm looking at, kind of in the twilight of my career, what do we do to take care of the clients that we have to ensure that the business continues to go forward and we continue to provide that value to those clients as we always have, and in tune grow the business. So we've been working and have a succession plan in place, and now are working on getting the operating agreement put together. So we and then are also in talks with another advisor about potentially joining us. So taken a long time to get to where we're at, but I feel real good about the direction we're heading right now.
It's really exciting. Thank you very much for sharing that story, because I think it's, there's so many things there about, to me, not only did you join you start the business with a structure, as you discovered, that wasn't necessarily long-term feasible for you in the best way, and you had to make some adjustments over the time. I think many advisors who've been in the business for a couple of decades will readily raise their hand and say, yeah, the business has changed dramatically for me over the years as well. It's really interesting for me to hear, that, the business, you're in a rural community, and there's some, special challenges with that, right? That you have to broaden your client base, and bringing on other advisors to be able to reach, from a geographic perspective, more people to build a business is really, really important. And for you, sort of like getting the limitations off, being able to recruit advisors was a big challenge at the beginning, and then, an impetus for getting to where you're at today. Brennan, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I mean, you joined your dad's business. You've had the opportunity to kind of see the business from, the early days and watch it grow, and then get to the point where you make a decision to join. Talk to me about that process for you, about, joining the family business, and how important it was for you to get these, the succession planning in place to make sure that, even though it's family, that, you kind of had the legal structure in place to protect your dad and yourself, and to make sure the business was set up for the future.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point here. I actually, when I was a high schooler, I actually was interested in the business. Kind of thought that someday I would probably start working with him. But went off to college, started working in venture capital, exploring some other opportunities, and kind of strayed away from that vision of coming back to join him. And then post graduation, I got to talk with him quite a bit and really learn about the business, and it kind of piqued my interest. So that's when I started with him, just kind of getting my foot in the door, trying to learn the business, getting licensed. And as we worked through that journey, I got to see some of the things he was dealing with, and that really helped me to kind of understand the backstory, I would say, which one of the things for joining a son joining his father's practice, or any child joining their parents' practice, is you kind of put your faith in your parents, I guess. Right away, we didn't really have a true succession plan. I'd ask him, and kind of got the response of, we're going to get it figured out. This will work out. Don't worry too much. And I think, being his son, I was able to accept that a little bit more than, say, somebody that wasn't a family member. Being a younger individual, you really like to see, what is the path? How do I grow? What do I need to do next? What does my future look like here? And I think that's important if you don't have a child working with you, is to really showcase that, this is our vision. This is how you grow. Because that means a lot. And that's, it took us, I've been with him for 4.5 years, about a year and a half in, we started talking about this. So it really took us 2 full years of trying to hammer through this before we have what I would say now is a clear-cut path, where I understand exactly how this is going to work over the next 10 years, or exactly how we want it to work. And the communication, it's always interesting, the father-son dynamic. Sometimes you say more than you should. But it's the communication is very important. I would say, whether whoever you're working with is, rather than trying to read between the lines, just being upfront about how you envision this, where you're going. That's one thing that we really try and work on too, because even though we know each other as well as we do, being a part of our life, or being as large of a part in our lives as we have been, it's still really important to try and communicate exactly what you're thinking, exactly what you're seeing, rather than try and assume things.
There's a couple of interesting dynamics here that I wonder if you guys might be willing to share. You both, Brad and Brennan, both of you mentioned talking about looking to the future and the succession planning being important for the future, restructuring the business being important for the future. I wonder if we could talk and you talked about trust as well, like, trusting your dad, Brennan. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how that trust kind of came back to you, meaning like how your dad's trusted your vision for your future, trusting to embrace your ideas, and kind of giving you the freedom to grow. Because I imagine, I'm trying to put myself in your place as an example, or I imagine younger advisors who are in your place, whether they're the son or daughter of the business, the primary business owner, or they're a junior advisor who's hoping to be the succeeding advisor at some point. Those elements have to be on their side, and they have to feel it from the senior advisor, right? The current owner. You have to feel that there's a freedom to grow. That's some trust in them as well, and their judgment. You talk a little bit about how you develop that and manage that, maybe?
Yeah, I'm glad you actually brought this up, because this was probably a pretty big pain point for us a couple of years ago. I came into the industry and I started learning everything about the industry as of 4 years ago, and so I'd be asking questions. Why aren't we doing it this way? Why can't we do it like this? And I didn't understand the backstory like Brad did. So he had all these, 35 years of knowledge in the business. And I came in and was looking at the business in a little bit different way, because I didn't have that past education. And I think that was healthy for the business, that you have somebody bringing different ideas in and kind of questioning the way things are done. But it can also get, frustrating for Brad or the advisor with more experience, because as Brad would say, I expect things to happen overnight. Very excited, ready to go after things, and it took me a little bit of education as far as okay, we got to slow down. We can't move as fast as I maybe hope, or things aren't as easy to accomplish as I would think they are.
That's fascinating. It's interesting. It's kind of like that compound, the miracle of compound interest, right? Like, so your dad's actually had the wisdom of have gone through the process to be able to look back and go, a little bit of improvement every year, you'd be surprised at what it grows to. And if you're a younger advisor, I imagine there's this, hey man, I want it now. I want to get to this point where I feel comfortable and I've grown and get my individual book of business, to where it is, where I want it to be. And your dad's going to have that ability to look back and go, well, it's coming. Don't worry, right?
Well, the dynamics has been real positive from the standpoint, as an advisor, you get caught up in your day-to-day ritual as far as working with clients, and it's hard to set aside that time to do the planning on your own business. And Brennan has really helped keep us organized and on point to move forward with that, because a lot of times we'll have discussions with other advisors and they're going, oh, how do you find the time to do that planning? It's just you carve out certain times of the day or make a point that Friday we're going to talk about strategic planning. And again, I kudos to Brennan for keeping us on point and organized, because that's a struggle for me at times.
And one thing I guess I'd like to point out, we've talked a lot about how this has affected us, but part of our move to Carson and the vision that I came in with, also with the importance of the succession plan, is protection of our clients. That was a big concern that we had to deal with here a couple of years ago, as I was a brand new advisor. Brad was the one that really knew the business, really understood it. If something were to happen to Brad, our clients were kind of left in a tough spot. And, that was an issue we really needed to solve. That was more important than us trying to figure out a succession plan for ourselves. Was really, how do we make sure our clients are taken care of if something were to happen to Brad? And now I think luckily we're at a place where we feel comfortable that we could say, even if something happened to Brad and Brennan, we've got the tools and the resources in place so that our clients would be taken care of. Because I think you're seeing that happen more often than you'd like to, where an advisor who maybe hasn't put the time into developing this succession plan, all of a sudden has a health issue or something happens, and their clients are kind of left wondering what to do. Well, the clients are also a big piece of this, even a bigger piece than just our personal situation.
That is so important to bring up, and I'm really glad you did kind of bring us back to that. Especially in the you're talking about independent financial advisors here, right? So your clients aren't dealing with some big monolithic major financial brand. They're dealing with you guys as a team, Premier Wealth Management, because they like that personal touch. They trust you. They that old know you like you, trust you type of thing. But it's even more important, I imagine, given the nature that you're in a more rural part of the country, and your clients probably trust you even more and rely on you to a greater extent, and have not as many options as somebody might have in a major city, right? So they've had some choice, but they chose you. And so that you take that responsibility incredibly seriously to make sure they're taken care of, whether you're there or not. You mentioned in our early prep call, we talked about how starting to work with Carla here at Trulytics. You mentioned that she had brought up some things that you hadn't thought about yet in the process as you're working in succession planning. I wonder if there's a couple of surprises you might be willing to share that were kind of eye-opening for you in the process.
I'll let Brad kind of share the eye-opening pieces, but the best thing that she did for us was get us to think outside the box. Prior to working with her, we were just focused on how does the business transition from Brad to Brennan. How do we make this happen? That was what was in our crosshairs. She got us to actually step out and say, how do you protect this business if Brad and Brennan aren't involved? If somebody else wants to join? She got us to really look at the bigger picture, which was very eye-opening for us. And I'll kind of let Brad share some of those eye-opening points.
some of the issues that, Carla has experienced in working with other firms, that you just really don't think about. What if, you have a group of partners and one of the partners becomes disillusioned and just is, I would call him a rogue advisor, and how you deal with that, internally within the firm. And all of that gets incorporated into your operating agreement, that you either have puts and calls that you can buy the stock back from that particular advisor if, majority votes that is in the best interest of the firm. She shared experiences of where she had to testify as an expert witness, and in the case of the firm not having that written into their operating agreement, the firm ended up closing. They had to break apart. Death, disability, those type of things. What happened? All the what if scenarios that may come into place that are written into the operating agreement. So she really got us thinking, and brought out points that we hadn't thought about on our own. Retirement. What happens if you transition the business to the successor, and within 3-4 years they turn around and the firm gets sold to someone else? There's look back provisions, all of those things. So it's really bringing to light various issues that all get written in just in case that scenario plays itself out. So it's very, very intuitive, and got us thinking.
The other thing that she really pushed, and we weren't thinking about at the time, was we were thinking about Brad and Brennan. How do we set this up for us right now to continue working? But she kind of brought up the points of let's go through everything. Let's have this set up so that when the time comes that you maybe bring in another partner, you want to share equity with another advisor. Let's get this set up so that you already have that precedence in place. And you're not all of a sudden, somebody else comes in, we're going to rewrite the rules. We kind of hold ourselves to the standard that we would hold somebody else in the future, as opposed to all of a sudden changing the rules when another individual gets involved.
It's really interesting. I love the fact that you've shared these kind of like eye-opening or vision expanding thoughts on it. It reminds me of when I was in college and just starting to learn about different types of business entities, right? What is a business and so forth. And one of my professors talked about a business being like a person, right? That a business is born, it lives, and someday it probably will die way in the future, or could die shortly. And it sounds like the conversation you had about succession really got you to look at the business as a living, breathing entity. And yes, you have your role in it now. And then, Brennan, hopefully yours is in it for many, many years to come. But you're thinking about the business and its life cycle, and what does it take to make sure that it continues to live regardless, and continues to serve its purpose, which is serving clients, regardless of whether you're involved or not.
And I think that's a good point, Mike. She really got us thinking that it isn't about Brad or Brennan, it's about the firm and protecting the firm, which is there to serve the client, and really got us thinking in terms of that as opposed to individually.
That's great. What are a few things that you'd encourage other advisors, whether they're Carson advisors or kind of the more broad universe of advisors out there? What are some things you'd urge them to consider as they approach succession planning? I mean, I know every advisor's situation is different, kind of like we would say if we were talking about financial planning stuff. Listen, everybody's situation is different. We get it. But there's probably, having a succession plan in place is the responsible thing for everybody to make sure they protect their business and the clients and the ownership's family and so forth. So for those who are listening, maybe, thinking about starting to create this thing, or maybe they've been dragging their feet, what kind of guidance might you offer for them, as they approach the process?
I think you need to tap your resources. Those people out there, whether it's the Carlas of the world, or somebody to really help you be that intermediary. You can have all this discussions amongst partners, or in our case, Brennan and myself, but to have that person that has experienced this with other firms and can bring to light the issues that need to be addressed is key. And, they take input from us and share their experiences and get you pointed in the right direction. And, it was invaluable to me, the experience that we went through after struggling for so long, trying to come up with answers and just not really knowing where to go for help was very, very frustrating. And I feel very good now as far as where we're positioned.
And I would say, the expression, "you don't know what you don't know," is perfect in this situation. I mean, there were so many things that we didn't even realize, were part of this succession planning. And, you can find a million reasons to kick the can down the road. Not enough time, it costs money, don't know where to start. But it was so eye-opening when once we just even dipped our toe in the water, we started realizing how many things that we didn't know. So it was a huge learning curve. But, now I feel like we understand the firm so much better. And that's a really cool feeling to know that you've got something that will be around for a long time. Your clients are protected. There, some of those and if or questions have been knocked off the table.
That's great. That's great. Okay, so bonus question. This is always the hard one. What are some of the most painful or challenging things that you experienced in the process, and how might you make it easier if you had to do it over again, right? So I'm sure there were some painful parts of the succession planning process, but if you had to do it over again, what might you do?
Go ahead, Brennan.
Okay. So one of the things that made this succession planning, one of the reasons we were kicking the can down the road is previously we were a C Corp. That came from the bank structure. Premier was originally set up as a C Corp, which is not very typical in financial advising practices. So that was one of the first problems we really had to solve before we could dive into anything else, because that had to deal with the valuation, the transition of shares. So we actually decided to convert our company to an LLC, and that was the first step we had to take. And that took a lot of contemplating, a lot of time working with our accountant, trying to understand the different tax structures, all the pros and cons. And that was just kind of a painful, it's not fun to try and analyze all this. And sometimes you can just overanalyze things. I don't know if there's any way to make that easier other than to, not overthink things. Right.
That's smart. It is interesting. There's got to be some pain points no matter what. But yeah, having the wrong business structure or the business structure that's not the end goal in place already, that's going to force some heavy lifting. For sure.
The other thing that unfortunately, this was not a huge pain point for us. Being a father-son, I think we understood each other pretty well. But Carla, she had to pose a lot of uncomfortable questions, talking about death of Brad, disability of Brad, Brad's retirement, death of Brennan. What if Brennan dies in 2 years as Brad's transitioned some of the business to him? So some of those questions, or, even Brennan gets married, Brennan gets divorced, some very, uncomfortable life scenarios that aren't always the easiest to talk about for people. That was kind of a tough discussion, but she handled it extremely well and got us thinking about, all the curveballs that life will throw at you, and how would we like that to happen, to fall out.
Right. It's funny you say that. I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think we did talk about that on the prep call, but it's like what you had to go through there was making yourself vulnerable and open to tough conversations in the same way that you as an advisor ask your clients to be and do, right? Like many of the conversations I'm sure you have with your clients, especially when you're bringing them on board, it's the first time they've ever talked about what happens if one of us dies, what happens if one of us loses our job, and what are your goals for the kids' college? Do you want them to go to a state school? Do you want them to go to a private school? Yada, yada, all that type of stuff. Very often it's the first time they're having these conversations, and you're kind of part, marriage counselor as much as you are, right? Planning and advice. Being willing as an advisor to put yourself in that same chair, if you will, during the process, I think is so important. It sounds like the two of you, well, I'm sure there's a lot of uncomfortable moments, did a great job.
And I think that's a good point, because going through the experience ourselves, you can have some empathy with our discussions that we have with clients, and hopefully, they're willing and able to share that information with us. But it is, at times, it gets to be a little bit uncomfortable. You even have those clients that come in, whether they're getting enrolled in their 401k plan, and they tell you, or will open up and say, I've dreaded coming in here because I know nothing about this, and they're intimidated. But, at the end of the 15, 20-minute session, they're saying, that wasn't so bad.
That's right. Yeah. And they're happy they did it. And that sounds like you guys are as well. So in wrapping up here, I know some folks are probably going to want to reach out to you at some point in time. It may be some peer advisors. It may be advisors that would love to join a firm that's put together, or frankly, it could be clients or what have you. Some people are going to want to follow up. So, what's the best way for people to reach out to you guys?
Yeah, if you have questions for me at all, the best email for me is Brennan, BRENNEN at premierwmg.com.
Well, my email is brad@premierwmg.com.
Okay.
That would probably be the best way.
So we got the website there, is premierwmg.com. And are you both on LinkedIn, social?
Yes.
As well? Perfect. Okay, great. So I'll put the links to your contact information in the show notes. Make sure everybody has the opportunity to reach out to you if they want to. Well, I really do appreciate both of you taking the time today. I'm sure our listeners do as well. Hope you have a great day, and we'll look forward to having you on maybe sometime in the future as well.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, guys.
Yep. All right. As always, thank you very much for taking the time to listen to the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. It means a lot, and I really do hope you're getting a lot of value out of the show. I know I did in listening to Brad and Brennan share their story, because I don't think it's unique. I mean, I know there's some unique facets to their business. I mean, the fact that it's a father and son team, the fact that where they're located, and the somewhat rural nature of their business, and kind of, a little bit different than many of us who are in relatively large cities. But there's a lot of commonality in terms of thinking about your business and what it means to ensure that the business lives on beyond the current ownership group. And some of these conversations, as you heard us talk about, really mirror in many ways the conversations that you're having with your clients. And sometimes those conversations are uncomfortable and make us uneasy, because we have to think about our own mortality. Maybe we have to think about somebody else's needs beyond our own. And we have to think through a lot of what if scenarios, as you heard the guys talk about there. So I'm really proud of them, really excited for them, the fact that they actually went through the process, and they seem to have a lot more confidence about the business now and in the future than they did before they went into the process. That this actually became a confidence booster, if you will. And I know they credited working with Carla here at Trulytics a few different times for that. But I think a lot of the credit also goes to the two of them for taking the process seriously and really looking themselves in the mirror and asking themselves some hard questions and hitting them head on. So thank you, gentlemen. Really appreciate you sharing your story. If you have other suggestions for people you'd like to be on the show, if you happen to be one of them, if you have a story of your own you'd like to tell about succession or acquiring another business or selling your business or anything that's going on is advisor transition management related. Love to hear from you. So make sure you do reach out via mike@truelytics.com or podcast@truelytics.com, or swing by the website and use that little contact us form and let us know about it. Okay. Hope you're having a great day, and we will talk to you next time on the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast. See ya. Bye.